Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of the Above the Break podcast. As always, I am your host, Ian Haig. I want to thank you all for being here. Once again, we're still early in this whole podcast game, right? I'm still getting the feet wet, still testing stuff out. So, as always, make sure you're liking, make sure you're subscribing. Let's run it up. Let's grow the community. I'm here with y'all. And most importantly, in the comments, let me know why the pretenders that I list should win or will win, and then why the contenders that I put are troll picks and I'm an idiot and I have no idea what I'm talking about, because I'm sure somebody thinks that I am an idiot and I have no idea what I'm talking about. So please, I invite the criticism, I invite the discourse. I'm always happy to talk hoops with other people. Before we get into it, I want to just briefly touch on All-Star Weekend, right? Obviously we got basketball back now, but trade deadline, All-Star Weekend, that stuff kind of comes and goes, and that's a good break and opportunity for the NBA to get its casual fans back invested into basketball, right? There's really, in my opinion, there's like 3 or 4 opportunities each season for the NBA to really just drive viewership and pull in those casual fringe fans who may not be basketball diehards, basketball sickos like you and I might be. And those would be opening night, obviously, right? New season tipping off. We should have exciting matchups between teams that either have some rivalry history, is a playoff matchup, whatever it is, just big stars, big names. Then you have the All-Star game, which I would consider as a part of trade deadline mixed in with that, right? You get big names moved, you get exciting stuff happening, shocking trades, stuff like that, similar to what we had this year. Obviously, maybe not to that extent, but then you kind of take that flow and that momentum from the trade deadline into the All-Star weekend, right? And then you put your biggest stars on the biggest stage, and you get people reinvested and hyped up going into the second half of the season. And then that third opportunity, or 3 and 4 combined, if you want to lump them in together, is the start of the playoffs and then obviously the NBA Finals. The playoffs, I think, are the easiest point in the year to get people invested in, right next to the season opener. Right, there's so much excitement, there's so much uncertainty. For the season opener, it's off-season moves, all those opportunities, right? But when you look at the opportunity that the All-Star game presents to draw casual fans in, we haven't really had any sort of hype builder for some years now, right? There's been tons of conversation about the All-Star game's dead, and even this year was the second least watched All-Star game, ratings-wise, and just by TVs per capita, right? And that doesn't surprise me. Did I think that this was on the level of the 2016 All-Star game? Obviously not. Nobody in their sane mind would think that. But honestly, that's okay. I see a lot of discourse, specifically on Twitter, right? That's where 99% of the basketball discourse from NBA fandom takes place, especially NBA Twitter, right? And people were always, nothing will ever beat this, nothing will ever top this. If we continue to tell ourselves this, much like the stuff that I talked about before with how, Charles Barkley and now even, I'll get to it, but Draymond Green tells us the product is going to be. And so when we consistently set unrealistic standards, it's like, for you 2K fans out there, it's like asking every subsequent game that company releases to be like 2K16. Or 2K17 or 2K20 even, whatever of those, is your favorite, to expect every subsequent drop of that same thing to be equivalent to the highest is naive and frankly ignorant. And so the same rule applies to the All-Star game. For us to expect every year to be Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon going, band for band, dunk for dunk, in arguably the most exciting dunk contest ever, at least probably since, post Vince Carter in 2000. But honestly, I didn't think All-Star was that bad outside of, and this is something that I found to be borderline egregious and just really bad presentation from the NBA. You got 3 hours of a TV block, right, to produce your All-Star Sunday night, right? So for this year, you had the format, right? So you played the Rising Stars tournament on on Friday night. And then the winner of that, which ended up being this Rising Stars team, I think it was Jeremy Lin coached them on Friday, right? And then obviously Candace did on Sunday. But the games themselves were fine. The issues that I mainly had was, and there was a Reddit post that I saw, Kenny Beecham, he talked about this in the All-Star video that he made, is the ads, man, and all the breaks. And I really felt that. And so if you're not aware, in that 3-hour block of television, we had 80 minutes of advertisements. That's not including the actual screen time breaks, right, when they did the TNT honor, right, and then, all the in-between hoopla, right, with the pregame stuff, which I thought was weird, or all the Kevin Hart stuff, which I also thought was weird. None of that includes that, right? That 80-minute block was strictly just commercials in some capacity, in comparison to only 42 minutes of actual hoops. That's egregious. I get that with the new format, right, presentation was going to be a little bit weird, but when they did, especially the TNT thing, when they did it, we're stopping. It was like 11-1, right? The game had barely gotten going, and then we break for 20, 25 minutes to do this weird presentation. I don't mind giving these guys props for what they've brought to the game in terms of like TV attention, right? They're certainly, I think, in terms of how they appreciate the product nowadays has kind of fallen off. But at one point in time, that was the place to consume NBA content. It was funny, it was digestible, and it was from guys who played the game before, right? So there was an element of credibility. I think to some extent that credibility has dwindled, at least in my opinion, at least in terms of the way that they support the game, but that's a topic for a different conversation. But when we're sitting here and these athletes, they get warmed up, and then they take, a 25-minute break, just sitting there on the bench waiting for this thing to end. I saw just about every fan base on Twitter during this break saying, I don't want anybody from my team going back out there because I just got cold, and now you want me to go back out there and play hard and be super competitive and locked in. You know what I mean? So when you have this, and Adam Silver said this himself, right, we're getting on the players and we're really pushing the players to really compete hard and really lock in for these games. That's fine if you want to preach that message, but I have to cultivate an environment that's conducive to that effort. And simply the environment they created, it's in poor taste to then go and ask them to come back out and play hard. It's just an unreasonable ask. I get having timeouts in the game. That's fine. If you want to have a timeout at 15 and at 30, even though that's not even division of a 40-point game, even if you want to do a timeout every 10 points scored, although that would be excessive, it would be more understandable than having this gigantic break in the middle of a game. And so for me, it's kind of just a wash at this point. What we're doing in terms of covering it, right? We got Draymond Green saying that rising stars aren't all stars. Obviously, we know this, right? But I don't want to necessarily rag on the players too much because at the end of the day, it is an exhibition game. And I'm not one of those people that sits up here and pretends like every all-star game that Michael or Kobe played in was the most gritty playoff game type atmosphere they've ever played in. There might be like 4 to 6 minutes, right, if it's a tight game in the fourth quarter. And guys that played in these games have even acknowledged this as true themselves, right? If it's a 5-point game, if it's a 7-point game with like 6 to play, those guys will go out there and we'll lock in for a few minutes and give these guys a show down the stretch. But I think it's unfair to really ask them to go out there and just, go crazy and risk injury. And, I've seen the clips from the Tyrese Halliburton Obama sit down. And I agree with a lot of what President Obama said in that interview, which in an extent was like, you guys go and play these summer circuits, right? You guys go to Brickley in the summer. You guys go to UCLA to do the UCLA runs. You guys play at the crossover in these pro-ams. You know how to play hard without going out there and just playing recklessly, right? No, again, nobody's asking you to play like it's game 7, but, some type of intensity would be great in spurts. Again, me personally, I'm not asking for 48 minutes, right? If it's a one-game sample, I'm not asking for 48 minutes of locked-in hard basketball. And I will say, I will give the players credit this year. It seemed like they were playing harder, right? Maybe it was the hey, it's only 40 points, right? Like, we're the best players on the planet. Us getting to 40 points, right? Like, we're going to make a lot of our shots, so that's going to go pretty quickly, which is what ended up happening. But they played hard, so I'm not going to dog on them too much. The three-point contest was fine. I think the three-point contest has ultimately become the premier event of All-Star Weekend, even over the dunk contest, and that's no shade to the guys that they have in the dunk contest, right? We saw some rumblings on Twitter. Ja was saying he'll do it. Giannis said if Ja does it, he'll do it. Aaron Gordon said he got some dunks left, and then Ja added Aaron Gordon and Zach LaVine to say, yo, like, let's do it. Why not? But Jaylen Brown is a good example of why stars aren't doing the dunk contest anymore. He went out there. He's an in-game dunker. He's like a poster guy. He's not like a crazy 360 windmill. You know, like, he's not doing these like pro dunker type dunks. That's not his game. And so he went out there and did like the dunks that he could do, and he got flamed for it. Like, we're expecting every dunk contest to be Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon. And so, right, like, Mac McClung came out, did his thing. Stephon Castle actually, I think, put on a pretty good show. And any year you have valid debates about who the winner was and who the winner should have been, I think it was a good enough dunk contest, at least for me personally. I have no issues with that. But that's really it. Like I said, the All-Star Weekend is All-Star Weekend. You either watch it or you don't. I don't think it's really that big of a deal, at least for me. While I understand I am not the target audience of All-Star Weekend, right? The casual fans, the kids, it's about building the excitement for the end of the season. So I'm just kind of in and out on it. It is what it is at the end of the day. One last thing before we get into our contenders and pretenders list, I want to quickly explain the 40-20 rule. If you know what the 40-20 rule is, you can go ahead and skip ahead and get right into contenders and pretenders. But for those of you who don't, I'll briefly explain. So the 40-20 rule was originally minted by Phil Jackson. So if you don't know Phil Jackson, I'm not sure why you're watching the show, but Phil Jackson, all-time coach, legendary coach, in 2008, came up with this idea that for you to be taken seriously and considered an actual relevant team to win a championship, you had to win 40 of your first 59 games, or 40 wins before 20 losses. And while I don't think that this rule is necessarily gospel, when 40 of the last 44 NBA champions qualified for 40-20, it's got to be a pretty decent measuring stick for determining who are the teams to really consider for being championship caliber teams. And so in case you're wondering, the only 4 teams since 1980, and for reference, 1980 is 1979, 1980 is when the three-point line was introduced. So at least from a court perspective, the rules are consistent from them to now. And so that's why this stat is measured from that season to today. So the 4 teams that didn't do it, or that didn't hit 40-20, but when it went on to win a championship, were the 1995 Rockets with Hakeem, Drexler, Kenny the Jet, right? You know the squad. The 2004 Pistons, right? That team that stunned the Lakers with Rasheed, Ben Wallace, TP, Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, right? You know the guys. Then you had the 2006 Dwayne Wade Heat, and then you had the 2021 Bucks. And so just one interesting note, and this will be something that will come up again later in this show, is that 3 of those 4 teams had all-time great playoff runs from individual players to win that championship, despite the fact that they weren't 40-20. Right? You think about what Hakeem did in that 95, not just Western Conference Finals, but in the finals as well. That's an all-time great run. Dwayne Wade literally backpacked the Miami Heat and old man Shaquille O'Neal to that championship, right? He won that basically himself, or at least as close to it could be in basketball. And then Giannis in 2021. For me, that's one of the most memorable finals performances that I've seen in a long time, and especially that closeout Game 6 that he had, 50 in a closeout, right? We think about the lob that he caught, the and one lob from Drew Holiday, or the Ayton lob that he blocked, right? There's, from each of those, from 3 of these teams, excluding the Pistons, although there are some great moments, that was more of a team championship, right? They kind of all rose to the moment at the same time. Obviously, Chauncey was the guy. He's big shot, right? But, I don't look at one individual from that Pistons team and say that's an all-time great playoff run. But Hakeem, D-Wade, Giannis, all-time great playoff runs. So for these teams that you guys might say, oh, well, they missed 40-20. They were 39-20. So what's the big deal? Or, hey, this team fits 40-20 or has a chance to get 40-20. Why are they not picked? Most of the time, it boils down to having the go-to guy for the teams that aren't 40-20, right? And those teams I just don't feel like have that alpha dog who can just go out and win you a playoff series. Or the teams that have a potential to hit 40-20 that I don't consider championship contenders, it probably has to do with some extraneous factor, or maybe it's just a very team-oriented scheme, and I just don't feel like the team can beat other teams around them. So that's all for that. I'll talk about the 40-20 rule plenty throughout this entire video, so I wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page and had all the same information, so you're not sitting there scratching your head wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Okay, with that being said, let's get into it. The first contender I have, to nobody's surprise, are the Cleveland Cavaliers. Not only are they tied for the best record in the NBA, not only did they get better at the trade deadline, but they have the components that's required to go out and win a championship. You think about Donovan Mitchell being a known playoff riser. You could go back to even his rookie year on the Jazz, where he's turning up and having 40-point explosions in the playoff. You think about what he almost did in the bubble against the Nuggets in that first round series. He almost knocked them out of the playoffs right then and there by himself. So you have the bigs, you have the defense, you have the shooting. They've been one of the best three-point shooting teams by efficiency all season long. I don't expect that to change. They're the third best road team behind only the Celtics and the Thunder. They're one of the best home teams. They have the ingredients. The only one thing that maybe worries me a little bit about them going into the playoffs, and maybe this is a bit nitpicky, but it's Darius Garland against the Celtics. They played 3 times this year already, and Darius Garland is shooting a combined 16 for 53 with 8 turnovers. For those of you who don't want to do the math, that is 30% from the field. He is one of the shiftiest, craftiest guys in the league, but the way to get at him, as we've seen time and time again, specifically against the Celtics, is length and strength. 2 things that the Celtics defense has in droves. And so I think while they do have, right, we talked about on the last episode when, going through the trade deadline stuff, DeAndre Hunter, huge pickup. They just picked up Javonte Green on the buyout market. So, they've kind of beefed up an iffy position for them. I was never a huge Georges Niang fan. He's gone. You basically just straight up replaced him for Javonte Green, and now you have DeAndre Hunter added into the mix. They've beefed up the wing personnel, and it's very obvious that they're trying to acquire pieces to not only beat other teams in the Eastern Conference, but beat the Celtics. And I promise you, I know y'all can see the clover. I'm wearing a Celtics sweatshirt right now. This is not bias. I promise you. But it's impossible to ignore an acquisition or 2 acquisitions for wing guys who are especially good defenders to guard 2 of the best wings in the NBA. But with that being said, if Darius Garland can find a way to just even be average, they'll be okay. All 3 of these games that they've played have come down to the last couple minutes of the game. And if you look at it, yes, one of the games Donovan Mitchell didn't play. The Celtics did win that game, but Darius Garland played horrible in that game. Even the 2 games that Donovan Mitchell did play, one of them that they ended up winning, Darius Garland didn't play that well, but he had his best game in the game that they ended up winning. So I think while I would probably pick the Celtics in a series against the Cavs right now, I certainly think that who they are now and this season and the stuff that they've been able to add to it 100% have an opportunity to not only win the East, but to win a championship. We were just talking about them. second contender has to be Boston Celtics. Again, no real surprises here, right? We haven't seen a defending champ since the Kevin Durant Warriors in that 2017-2018 back-to-back years. But I think the Celtics could do it. People want to talk about them being not the same team that they are this year, championship hangover, blah, 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 blah. At this same point in the year last year, they were just 3 games better. And as we saw from the way that regular season ended last year, they're one of the best teams. That specific Celtics team is one of the greatest teams ever. And it's pretty much the exact same team. But the most interesting thing for me this year is not anything that they did last year, but it's actually what they've done this year that's dissimilar to last year. So this season, the Celtics have already run 1,500 minutes with 2 bigs on the floor, something that they did last year, both regular season and playoffs combined, just 1,200 minutes. So that 1,500 minutes is about a third of the total minutes that they've played this season with 2 bigs on the floor. Now, usually what you'll see is some combination of a non-shooting big with a shooting big, right? So it'll be Luke Kornet and Porzingis, or it'll be Neemias Queta and Al Horford, or some combination of those 4. And what's really interesting to me is how much it impacts the spacing, but in a positive direction, right? One thing that was consistent throughout the Celtics season last year was an abundance of 5-out sets. But this year they're running a lot more 4-out, 1-in with a big in the dunker, whereas last year when they ran those 4-1 sets, it was usually Drew Holiday or Jaylen Brown in the dunker, so a smaller player, more athletic player, just to help draw the big out of the paint. But what we've seen this year is Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum both take another step in terms of rim reads, right? So when I have somebody at the dunker and I'm in isolation on the wing or at the top of the key, I'm essentially giving myself opportunities for, one, the center to Gortat screen the rim protector. I get a free lay. Or when the big steps to me, I can now dump off, I can lob. And so like I said, those two have been exceptional on rim reads this year, and it's really opened up the spacing because what happens is not a lot of other teams have the facilities to go double big. And so really double big has been the solution to a season-long issue for the Celtics team, which is closing out possessions. They're still fourth in defense as of right now. They're still the only team in the NBA that's top 5 in defense and in offense, and they're number 2 in net. While it's different this year, and it looks different, it doesn't feel different, at least not for me. Jason Tatum's playing the best basketball he's played in his career. There's a lot of weird hate online, and I'm not really interested in getting into that too much. But this team absolutely has everything that it needs. It's seasoned. They're poised. I think the monkey's off their back a little bit, right, in terms of there was a lot of this talk. You can't do it. You can't do it. You can't do it, which will come up later in this episode as well. But now they've done it. They've proven to you that they can do it. So now I think for them, a lot of that pressure's off, and they can kind of just go hoop. The next contender is, again, not a surprise, the Oklahoma City Thunder. Right? We knew they were going to be on this list, tied with the Cavs for the best record in the league. They're 44-10. This, to me, is one of the most fun defenses I've ever watched. I really love watching the Houston Rockets play, but it really feels like the Thunder are just an elevated version. Obviously, they manufacture things offensively a lot differently in terms of how they're getting into their sets and who they're getting the sets for, but it just feels like if OKC had offense. They have rangy, athletic, feisty, gritty defenders, and they run and they switch absolutely everything. And you're sitting there and you're wondering, okay, well, you know, this is a league that prioritizes and thrives on matchup hunting, right? There's always somebody on the floor that's the weak link. And we see it anytime. If we need a bucket in the playoffs, I'm going to run high screen and roll. I'm going to get the switch with the best matchup, and I'm going to let my best player ISO their worst defender. That's usually the half-court recipe to success. But I want to ask you something. Who is that player for the Oklahoma City Thunder in their closing five, right? I'm not talking about bench guys that you can attack. The team, the 5 players that are going to be on the floor in a playoff game to close for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Who are you switching with? Maybe you could say Hartenstein, or maybe you could say Chet, right? Just because they're the bigs. But even then, Hartenstein 2 years ago was not considered a good defender in any capacity. But it's funny what playing winning basketball does to your perception as a player. He went from bouncing around the league, not really finding a true home, and then he takes advantage of the Mitchell Robinson injury for the Knicks last year and absolutely explodes in his role and is now considered one of the better rim protectors and versatile defending centers in basketball. And so then you say, okay, well then if it's not Hartenstein, then it's got to be Chet. Let me ask you, if Chet's fully healthy, who can't he guard? Right? Maybe he doesn't have the technique yet to really stay with guys on the perimeter, but he has so much length that he can sag a little bit and still be able to recover. I mean, my God, the guy's 7'2". He has incredible length to be able to close out and challenge a jump shot while still being able to recover and chase you down and contest at the rim. And so Shea's a good defender. Although I think he's a slightly overrated defender, he is certainly a good defender and certainly not a liability in any stretch of the word. J-Dub's a great defender. And then you take your pick about the last guy you want on the floor. Is it Lou Dort? I would imagine it would be, but let's say Lou Dort's not there. Caruso. Isaiah Joe and Aaron Wiggins are kind of just okay defenders. But even if it's like Kenrich Williams, if you want to go super, like insanely big, which is probably something we would never see happen, they have defenders everywhere. And so it's hard for me to see a team that has an MVP candidate, the best defense in basketball, and a team that's young and hungry, and not say that they have a great chance at winning a championship. The only thing is they haven't done it. I just talked about it with the Celtics, right? They haven't done it. And so until they prove that they can go and win, right? We haven't seen Oklahoma City go past the second round in a very long time. And so while I fully expect them not only to make it to the Western Conference Finals, but they would be my pick to win the West, they still have to go out and do it. But if they can overcome their youth, right? You have some guys on that team, I guess it's really just Caruso, that have championship DNA or have won at a really high level that can sprinkle some of that wisdom down and help keep guys composed. But this team doesn't really strike me, and I haven't really gotten the vibe that this team gets rattled, right? How many times have they have the most double-digit comeback wins in basketball this year. They haven't been playing with their starting center for most of the season. He just recently came back. So again, I don't know that they wouldn't be my favorite today to win a championship, but they would certainly be my pick to come out of the West. And again, they have all of the ingredients, just like the Cavs, to go and win a championship. My last contender might surprise you just a wee bit based on how much I've emphasized 40-20, but it's the Denver Nuggets. Now, they are one of 3 teams. So as of now, we have 3 teams that have hit 40-20, and they're the 3 contenders that I've already named, right? The Celtics hit 40-20 tonight. The Cavs and the Thunder hit 40-20 a long time ago. They smoked it. But the Nuggets have a chance to hit 40-20. They're 37-19 right now. Now, they are on a 9-game win streak. 8 of those came before the All-Star break. They beat Charlotte tonight to extend that to 9. It's going to be a tough task for them to win another 3 straight, but they have some easier matchups coming up in some games that I would expect them to win, and they could get to 40-20, which only would service to strengthen, in my opinion, their claim of being a contender. But even if they don't, right, I talked about people capable of having legendary and all-time great playoff runs en route to a championship. Jokic could easily do that. We've seen Jokic's playoff resume. We know what he does in the playoffs. And yeah, there have been some times where, like last year, where he just went bonkers for a whole series and they couldn't seal the deal. But that Timberwolves team, their front office has acknowledged this, that they were specifically designed to beat the Nuggets. and they barely beat them. Now, it did take, it took a 25-point Game 7 comeback for the Timberwolves to win that series, and it took every ounce of their fiber of their being, based on what we saw in that Mavericks series, how just tired and out of it that they looked almost the entirety of that series. And it took them, that's what it took for them to beat the Nuggets. So, I mean, yeah, have there been some inconsistencies, especially early in the season when they were trying to figure out what was the best way to highlight Russ, or, Aaron Gordon got hurt, and now we're like, okay, does Russ start? Does Aaron Gordon start? And they've been able to manage and work that out. And even with the inconsistencies that MPJ had early in the season, it gave guys like Christian Brown, Julian Strother, Peyton Watson opportunities to really come into themselves after you lose, right? Like, KCP's not there. He was on the championship team. Bruce Brown's not there. Reggie Jackson's not there. So you need guys to really step up and come into their own to be able to supplement the loss of role players. That's just how the NBA works. But I think they've been able to do that well. And even now that MPJ is playing much more back towards the mean of what he produces on a night-to-night basis, they're poised to make a deep run. And like I said, when you have Jokic on your team, I'm never going to count you out. I have to consider the Nuggets a championship contender just because they have Jokic. But then when you add the other factors in there, like the ability for them to just magically come back from 15 midway through the fourth quarter, or they're down 25 at half. We saw it in the playoffs last year in that same Timberwolves series. In that game 3, right, where the Timberwolves were up 20 early in that game, and everybody was like, "Oh no, are they about to sweep them? Like are they going to punk them like they punked Phoenix?" Nope, they fought back, and obviously they ended up losing that series, but it wasn't because of Jokic. I can promise you that. So we'll see what ends up happening. But Aaron Gordon is shooting the best he's ever shot, and their biggest question mark for me coming into the season was going to be floor spacing around Jokic, especially adding Russ to that. But Aaron Gordon is just casually shooting 44% on catch-and-shoot three-point opportunities, so I think they'll be okay. And like I said, if Jokic can get hot, even if they don't hit 40-20, I would have a lot of faith in them to come out of the West and win a championship. So for my pretenders, maybe there's some teams on here that you're going to hear and be like, why are they even in the pretenders? Obviously, they're not going to win a championship. What are we doing here? I kind of just looked at it from teams that had some at least deep playoff run expectations coming to the season. Some notable admissions, or maybe in your opinion, not notable admissions from this list. The Suns are terrible. They lost again tonight to the Spurs without Wemby. Prayers up for Wemby, by the way. Get well soon. We've seen guys come back from blood clots and deep vein thrombosis before, but scary stuff. So prayers up for Victor Wembanyama. But the Suns are terrible. I don't have anybody below the 5th seed in the East that I even considered for this list. Detroit's just happy to be here. The Magic have no ability to stretch the floor and score the basketball. The Heat are the Heat. The Hawks are the Hawks. And the Bulls have 17 point guards on their roster. So it's really just teams that are currently in automatic playoff spots, or teams that could threaten for the 6th seed in their conference. So let's just get right into it. The first pretender, unfortunately, is the Houston Rockets. I love watching this team play. Amen Thompson is one of my favorite players in the league. Jabari Smith is coming back really soon. I think he's actually coming back next Tuesday, last I heard. So, very exciting team. As a coach, I like Ime Udoka. Made some questionable life decisions. How do you cheat on Nia Long? I'll never know. But they're pretenders. And really what it boils down to at the end of the day is just a lack of an alpha, right? I talked about it earlier. These teams that don't hit 40-20, which the Rockets didn't, that need this all-time playoff run. And there's just nobody on this team that's capable of doing that. Maybe I'm proven wrong. Maybe Amen Thompson just has the craziest playoff run for a second-year player ever, and just goes insane and wills the Rockets to a championship though that seems very far-fetched given just where his offensive game is. But there just isn't a killer. There isn't a closer, right? Maybe you could look back at what Fred VanVleet did in that 2019 Finals series, but that's like, it was a joke, but it's real. That was new Pops Fred, right? That was the new dad energy. Derek White did the same thing in the playoffs last year. 38, the first game he came back after a new kid. So that's real. Fred VanVleet's not doing that again. Jalen Green has showed in flashes, but without any sort of regularity, that he's that guy. And quite frankly, I don't think Şengün's game, as much as I like it, it's not really suited. It's suited for him to more be a hub for the offense to revolve around, but he's not going to go out and put up just these insane carry job scoring numbers and will the Rockets to a win. It just doesn't happen very often, right? Obviously, he has games where he explodes. He could have 30, 35, but he's not going to go out there and be the guy to get you 4 or 5 buckets in a row in the fourth quarter when you really need them to. So when you're 7th in offense, the best Rockets team to ever win a championship was that 95 Rockets team, obviously, right? They finished 7th in offense. The Rockets are currently 12th in offense, and as great as their defense is, defense propels you to championships, but it doesn't win you championships. I got to score at the end of the day. And a lot of people might disagree with that, and as much of a defensive guy as I am, we can just see. We can just look. You can't be a pedestrian. The Timberwolves last year were I think they ended the regular season 14th in offense, but they were the number 1 defense. And it took them to the Western Conference Finals, but at some point, my offense has to wake up, and I need those explosions to overcome the other team just being insane offensively. We saw what Luka did in game 2? Was it game 3 of that Western Conference, where he came out and had like 20 first quarter points, and he was pulling from the logo, like taking some egregious shots, but they were all hitting. There is no amount of defense that I can play that is going to stop that from happening, so I have to be able to score. And the Rockets just can't do that sometimes. It's a lot like watching the Magic, but obviously the Rockets are much better than the Magic, where the ball just doesn't go in the hoop sometimes for 4, 5, 6 minute stretches at a time. And that can't happen in a playoff game and expect to win a series. Now, little tidbit, I have seen some rumors swirling from Rockets insiders that if the Suns elect to rebuild this offseason, be on the lookout for Devin Booker to Houston. That might propel them to a championship, but they don't have Devin Booker, so they're not championship contenders. The Milwaukee Bucks are my second pretender. Again, another non-40-20 team, but really outside of that, yes, Kyle Kuzma helps you, I think, more than Chris Middleton does. Did he pick up some pretty egregious, lazy habits playing in Washington? Of course. Would I expect that playing a bunch around of kids, basically 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and you're not playing for anything? I can understand it. But we've seen what winning does to players with interesting or weird perceptions around the league, and I think that'll be no different for Kyle Kuzma in Milwaukee. Right, this is a team that not only wants to win, but really has to win based on the window that they have with Dame and with Giannis and Brook Lopez as well, right? They traded away Chris Middleton. Who's to say that Brook Lopez doesn't fall off the cliff similarly to what Chris Middleton did this year? And so, they have some interesting pieces. Andre Jackson's cool. Gary Trent Jr.'s cool. Taurean Prince has played well for them this year. I just don't think they have enough at the end of the day. There's only so much that Giannis and Dame can do for you. And not to mention, they're one of the worst fast break defensive teams in the league. That's not a surprise. It's Doc Rivers' team. That's pretty consistent with Doc Rivers' teams. The Indiana Pacers. As exciting as this team is, they did make the Eastern Conference Finals last year. They give me like pseudo 2021 Atlanta Hawks vibes, right? Where the Hawks went and played the Bucks that year, that the Bucks won the championship, right? They beat Philly in Philly. The infamous Ben Simmons, Trae Young layup, that sort of thing. But better, right? The Hawks went to the Eastern Conference Finals, got absolutely dismantled by the Bucks, and then they haven't been even close to being back since. In fact, I don't even think they've won a playoff series since then. So I will give the Pacers a little bit more benefit of the doubt than I would the Hawks in this scenario. And they've been good this season. I mean, they're fourth in the East. They're probably just going to end up being fourth in the East. They're 5 in the loss column, back of the Knicks. And even though the Knicks had to go to OT to beat the Bulls tonight, who have 17 point guards, I don't see the Knicks falling off bad enough or the Pacers getting hot enough to go get that 4 seed. Now, I do think that they're a great matchup for the Bucks in the first round of the playoffs, especially with what we saw last year, although Milwaukee had some injuries, and so that definitely hurt them in that series. But I just don't see them beating any of the 3 teams above them in the playoffs. Do I think they're better than they were last year? Certainly. But I think Tyrese Halliburton's not consistent enough of an offensive player from a scoring perspective. Obviously, we know what he does playmaking-wise and facilitating, but I think sometimes when he's not aggressive enough, that actually hinders his team, because when he goes through the hole, teams aren't defending him to score, we're defending him to pass. And so it makes it a lot easier for defenses to scheme against you. And as good as Pascal is as a half-court player, right, which is really what the Pacers needed, especially last year, right? They struggled in the half court, and they do this year. It's the defense that really bugs me for them. Do they give the Celtics fits every time they play them? Do they give the Bucks fits every time they play them? 100%. But that's just good matchups in terms of what they're doing. Against both of those teams, the Pacers are just selling out offensively to essentially just win because I'm going to outscore you. And as much as I would like to say that they could go to the Eastern Conference Finals again this year, it would take, right, people joke about the injury luck the Celtics had last year, but the Pacers got really fortunate with injuries, specifically in that Knicks series, right, where I think it was 6 of the top 7 rotational players for the Knicks had some sort of ailment in some capacity in that series. So I'm just not sure they have enough, but it would certainly require a perfect storm for them to win. Maybe one of the more controversial takes or controversial teams to have on this pretenders list is the Memphis Grizzlies. And I know what you're going to tell me, but Ian, they're 3rd in the West. They could get to 40-20. First of all, they'd have to go 4-0 to get to 40-20. And they already lost tonight, so they were 4-1. They had to go 4-1 coming into tonight. They lost tonight to Indiana, and now they got to go 4-0 to get to that 40-20 mark. But again, even if they don't get to 40-20, they just don't have the pieces. I think you got worse at the deadline, moving Jake LaRavia and getting back Marvin Bagley. I mean, come on. Marvin Bagley played 1 minute yesterday, and I get that it was his first game with the team, but Scottie Pippen Jr. played less than 2 minutes tonight as well. Ja is not the same Ja that we saw in the first round, or not even just the first round, in these playoff series, right? You think back to the Lakers series or the Warriors series in 22. It's not the same Ja. For whatever reason, he's just not scoring well. He's just not being the attacker that he is. And maybe some of that has to do with the offensive leap that Jaren Jackson Jr. has taken, right? So there's some responsibility not on Ja's plate. Or maybe it's just Taylor Jenkins' style of offensive basketball, right? Not a ton of pick and roll. If any pick and roll at all, let's get out and run. Let's move without the basketball. Let's screen without the basketball, stuff like that, which has been extremely effective for them. But it requires a ton of pace. And it requires you to move extremely quickly into your actions. Not too dissimilar to the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns. But right, they're first in pace. They're first in points per game. All of these fast metrics that you might expect the Pacers to be leading, and it's actually the Grizzlies. But I don't think Jaren Jackson Jr. is good enough as an offensive player, although he probably is going to win Defensive Player of the Year now that Wemby's done. He's just not, I don't think he's good enough to carry you offensively as good as he's been this season and as much as he has improved. But now we're talking about trading Ja in the offseason potentially. But I'm confused by this because the whole point of trading Jake LaRavia, despite the fact that you're 28th in the league in payroll and well below even just the first apron, you trade him so that it allows you to extend all three of your guys, right? Ja, Desmond Bane, Jaren Jackson Jr. in the offseason and still stay under the first apron. But now you're talking about, and obviously it hasn't happened yet, these are just rumors, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me where this team is going. And when I think from an organizational perspective, there's some uncertainty with the moves that we're making. I think that honestly trickles down into the locker room, and they're not really sure what's going on, and it creates some sort of like disconnect within the team, right? Where there's not necessarily a ton of, for lack of a better term, like spunk and like zeal for going out and winning basketball games. And that's not to say that they don't care about winning, but it feels less of a collective direction. And until, I think, unless Ja Morant miraculously becomes Ja Morant again, because he'd been out there looking like T. My fault. But unless he returns to his normal status of being this extreme, explosive, dynamic type of scorer, I don't think the Grizzlies have enough to go out and beat any of these other Western Conference contenders to make the finals. The New York Knicks are also a pretender for me. It really just boils down to two things, or I guess three things. The matchup nightmares defensively that Jalen Brunson and Cat are. And I understand Jalen Brunson leads the league in all these offensive fouls drawn and charges drawn stats. But he's not a very good defender. And he makes up for it by doing a good job at whether you want to call it flopping or selling contact, whatever it is, he's getting these offensive foul calls because he's willing to take the hits. And so I'll give him credit where credit is due on that. But simply as a point of attack defender, he's not very good. And so I can just, in my head, imagine a Karl Anthony Towns, Jalen Brunson defended pick and roll. Because if Cat's not in drop, I can just rise up and shoot behind the screen because you're in drop, which is why you don't play drop against teams with good perimeter scoring, which just about every Eastern Conference playoff team has. But then if he's not in drop, he's one of the worst perimeter defenders in basketball. And that's not to take away anything that he's done so far this season. He's easily one of the best bigs or just players in general in basketball this season. And for me, if I was voting on it and I had a say, he would be a first-team All-NBA candidate when that time came. But at the end of the day, I mean, we haven't seen this Knicks team fully healthy, and obviously they made some exciting moves, and it's the first year with Cat, first year with McHale. And so, they look well-equipped. But it's the same thing that I said about Darius Garland and the Cavs. It's what all of these teams are saying in their press conferences. If you want to be the best, you have to beat the best. And the best at the current time is the defending champion, Boston Celtics. And the Knicks cannot even stay attached to Boston. They've lost both games this year by a combined 72 points. And Jason Tatum has gone off for 37 and 40 in both of those games. So, you get all these wing defenders, right? The OG Anunobis. Even Miles McBride is a good defender. But Mikal Bridges, Josh Hart, right? You have all these guys that are equipped to stop Boston, and they just can't do it. That's not to say that they couldn't in the playoffs, right? That certainly could happen, and they could get hot. We've seen what Jalen Brunson can do in the fourth quarter, where he just takes over and becomes this playoff riser, right? All the 40-point games that he had in the playoffs last year, basically willing the Knicks down the stretch to a win when everybody around him was gone. But, in the event of some injuries, and the same thing could be said for just about every other team, I have some concerns. And as good as they've been offensively, they've had a little bit of regression defensively from what they did last year. And I just don't see that they could beat. Forget Boston. I don't see them beating Cleveland, and then certainly I don't see them beating Oklahoma City in the finals. A few teams that I'll just briefly touch on. Not a lot needs to be said about them, but like I said, I included some teams that have championship expectations. The Lakers, I think the only people that would potentially consider the Lakers as championship contenders are Lakers fans, and I respect the hustle. I really do. I just don't see it. I think as of now, the team is actually worse with Luka Doncic on the floor than Anthony Davis on the floor. Somebody joked on Twitter the Lakers went from 98% chemistry to 26% chemistry. And in a lot of ways, I can see it. While I do like the DFS addition that they made earlier in the season, I do like them picking up Alex Len. I think that gives them at least a little bit more depth at the center position. But they just lost to the Hornets in Staples Center last night. Not a good look. There's also reports that Luka's calf strain that he just came back from is likely more serious than previously thought. And I'm not going to jump the gun because I still think trading Luka Doncic is an absolute heinous crime against the basketball gods. Nico Harrison looking all right right now, despite the fact that Anthony Davis is now hurt. The irony. The Clippers, Kawhi's health and the trust in the ancillary pieces is certainly questionable. I think, obviously when Kawhi Leonard's healthy, I think he's certainly at bare minimum one of the 10 best players in basketball. Even now at his age with his injury history, he just is. Nobody with that resume is going to be counted out for me in a playoff series. But I'm just not sure how much you got Bogdanovich, which is cool. But basically you just traded defense for three-point efficiency. With him and Terrence Mann, which I guess is all right, but I'm just not seeing a lot there that's going to be able to take them over these other Western Conference teams. And again, not 40-20, as you probably could have imagined. The Timberwolves and Mavericks are kind of in similar spots where there's potential that they could fall completely out of the playoff picture. They're in the play-in right now, but neither team has played well. They're about 500 in their last 10. And now Anthony Davis is hurt for the Mavericks. So, if he misses any sort of extended amount of time, they could completely be out of the playoff picture. And then for the Wolves, the Julius Randle thing has just not worked so far. And it's hard to build cohesion when he's not on the floor and he's been hurt. So I don't expect the Timberwolves to make a deep run, much less win a championship. A big thank you once again to not only those of you who made it this far, but really just by clicking on the video or even just giving it a like is very much appreciated from my end. If you disagree, which I'm sure we're bound to disagree, especially you spirited Lakers fans out there, get at me in the comments, man. Tell me why I'm an idiot. Tell me why the Celtics suck. Tell me why Jason Tatum's a role player. All that good stuff. Please, I need the engagement. I'm just playing. But anyway, thank you once again. These videos are interesting for me because a lot of times it maybe it feels like it's deliberately structured content, but sometimes it just feels like I'm talking to one of the boys about hoops, right? And that's really all this is for me. This show is just an avenue for me to talk about hoops. So, I'm going to continue to do this as long as I'm having fun doing it. And obviously I've just started, so for me to even potentially remotely contemplate stop doing it is an egregious thing to consider. And I'm not even sure why I brought it up. So welcome to the randomness in the mind of me. We've now reached the point of the episode where I actually don't have notes. I outlined the whole episode to keep me on track because if you didn't know, at one point in time I did have another podcast that was actually banned on most podcasting outlets, if you will, because I called somebody out their name. Actually, no, I didn't. Basically, all that happened, if you're curious at all, is I essentially just potentially said some unsavory things about some NCAA officials. And this was pre-NIL. This is like COVID quarantine when everybody's starting podcasts, right? I just did it off a whim. I didn't really have a theme. I didn't really have a plan. I was just kind of out there just letting it rock. And basically, I didn't get an actual cease and desist, but I did get a strongly worded email from their press team, or whatever you want to call it, kindly and strongly asking me to take it down. And then I got an email from Apple Podcasts, and then subsequently Spotify, saying that I violated their TOS. Now, they could not point to me what part of their TOS I violated, because there was no hate speech. There was no slander. I didn't accuse these guys of doing anything that would cause them jail time. Not because it's not illegal, but because they wouldn't get prosecuted for it, because there's really no way for me to prove anything that I was saying in the video. But I basically just said that, these guys are essentially taking money. It's a non-profit organization, but these guys are making tens and $20 million a year to be president or chief operational officer, whatever it is, for the NCAA, which is supposed to be, and even to this day is not, for the student athletes. It should serve as a protectorate for the student athletes, not Big Brother to student athletes. So that's kind of all it was, and I guess they didn't like it. Now ask yourself how in the world they would have found out that I was saying such things with like 50 listeners, if that, on a podcast done in my bedroom on like some cheapo whatever mic. Like it was not a very polished show. I didn't have notes. I kind of just rambled about stuff. And honestly, I'm surprised that 50 people even listened in the first place. But nonetheless, they found it. And the KGB came banging on my door. And that was that. So this is my redemption arc. I went through the training arc. Shout out to those of y'all that are into manga and anime and whatnot. I went through the training arc. Now I'm in the redemption arc, where I'm saving the Leaf Village. Shout out Naruto, by the way. Anyway, actually, I don't know if you guys can see it, but back there somewhere, I actually don't know if you can see it or not, but there's a little Naruto figurine back there. So shout out Naruto. But anyway, I'm just rambling at this point. So shout out to y'all if you're still listening. I love y'all, really, truly, genuinely. I do. Give me ideas for stuff that y'all want to see. You want me to start doing smaller videos in spurts, or what do y'all got? What do y'all want? I'm here for y'all. So let me know. And until next time.